My name is Marilyn Matthews, 29 years old. The clink of silverware and the faint hum of conversation filled my parents' dining room, a place that had always carried an odd duality for me. On the surface, Sunday dinners were a family tradition, warm food, laughter, stories. But beneath the surface, they were a battleground of comparisons, subtle digs, and carefully measured glances. Tonight was no exception. Sarah, my older sister, had already monopolized the conversation for the better part of 20 minutes. She scrolled through her phone, displaying one photo after another of her newly renovated kitchen. Marble countertops, custom cabinets, backsplash flown in from Italy. She listed proudly, tilting the screen toward Dad, who nodded with approval. It's amazing what homeownership allows you to do. Then, with a pointed smile, she added, "The equity just keeps building month after month, unlike some people who throw money away on rent with nothing to show for it." Her words lingered in the air, disguised as casual observation, but sharp enough to cut. Mom's face lit up, beaming with maternal pride. Sarah's always been the smart one with money. So practical, so forward-thinking. I kept eating quietly, my fork moving methodically through mashed potatoes, masking the irritation that simmered beneath my calm. Dad decided to add his voice, slicing his steak with a little too much force. "Maybe it's time you started thinking about your future seriously, Marilyn. You can't rent forever like some college kid." At 29, most successful people are buying property, building equity, investing, not throwing money into a landlord's pocket. Across the table, Sarah leaned back with a self-satisfied smile, the kind she reserved for moments when she was untouchable. "I get it. Not everyone qualifies for a mortgage. It's tough these days, credit scores, down payments, financial discipline. But there are programs for first-time buyers. You just have to know where to look." The condescension dripped from her every syllable. Uncle Robert, never one to miss a chance to jab, chimed in between sips of wine. "The housing market isn't for everyone. You need real income, perfect credit, serious responsibility. Some people just aren't cut out for that." I offered my usual polite nod, swallowing both the beans on my plate and the familiar wave of dismissal. My role was clear, the family disappointment who never quite measured up. "Maybe start small, honey," Mom said softly, reaching for my hand with concern that carried a sting of pity. "A condo, a townhouse, something manageable. Work your way up." "If she can even qualify for a mortgage," Dad muttered his words, just loud enough to hang in the air like smoke. The conversation carried on this way for over an hour. Sarah detailed her promotion, her 5-year plan, her dreams of a bigger house with a pool. The rest of them listened with admiration, offering nods and praise. I listened, as I always did, quietly playing the part assigned to me. Later, as we cleared dishes, Sarah cornered me in the kitchen. She lowered her voice, her tone switching to a syrupy kind of concern. "I hope you don't take Dad's words too personally. He just wants what's best for you. We all do." "I know," I replied evenly, rinsing plates, careful not to reveal anything beneath the surface. "If you ever want advice about pre-approval or a real estate agent, I know an amazing woman who helps first-time buyers, especially those with, smaller budgets." She smiled sweetly, but her eyes glinted with superiority. I forced a smile back. "That's generous of you." The drive home was long and quiet, headlights cutting through the dark. The night replayed in my mind, every word, every smirk, every nod of approval directed at Sarah. It wasn't new. It had been this way for years. Sarah, the successful one. Me, the underachiever. But what none of them knew, what Sarah herself would fight tooth and nail to keep hidden, was that for the past 2 years, I had been paying her mortgage. Every single month. $3,200 wired directly from my account to hers. The irony was almost poetic. While she boasted about wealth and lectured me on responsibility, I was the one quietly keeping her afloat. And tonight, as her laughter and smugness echoed in my memory, I realized something: I was getting tired of carrying her secret. It began with a phone call I can still hear in my head, the shaky voice of my sister Sarah breaking through sobs late one night. "Marilyn, I don't know what to do," she gasped between breaths. "They're restructuring the entire department. My job's gone. 3 months at least before I find something else. The mortgage is $3,200 a month. I don't have enough in savings to last more than 6 weeks." I remember pressing the phone to my ear, sitting alone in my dark apartment, feeling both a stab of sympathy and an unsettling sense of déjà vu. Sarah had always been the golden one, the success story. To hear her like this stripped of confidence was disorienting. "What about Mom and Dad?" I asked cautiously. "No, absolutely not," she snapped, her panic sharpening. "They can't know. Do you understand? They'd never look at me the same again. I've worked too hard to build this image. If they knew I couldn't even afford the house. Her words broke into another sob. Please, don't tell them. I'm begging you. There was a silence on my end. My mind spun through the years of lectures at family dinners, the endless comparisons, the way she'd basked in being the accomplished one. Yet in that moment, hearing her so fragile, I felt something I hadn't expected: protectiveness. All right, I finally said. I'll help you, just until you're back on your feet. I set up an automatic transfer from my business account, $3,200 every month, enough to cover the mortgage. I told myself it was temporary, a lifeline, not a habit. But temporary stretched into permanence. Sarah found another job months later, but it paid $30,000 less than her old one. Stability, she called it, but the new salary barely scratched the surface of her financial commitments. She framed my continued payments as a loan. I'll pay you back, she promised one afternoon over coffee, her smile brittle. As soon as I get promoted, or land a higher paying role. It won't be forever. I nodded, hiding the fatigue creeping into me. At first I believed her, but the months rolled by, then a year, and then another. Meanwhile, the family dinners didn't change. If anything, Sarah doubled down on her role. She showcased renovations, boasted about her long-term financial discipline, and joined Dad in nudging me about why I hadn't caught up. Every time she said homeownership is about sacrifice and responsibility, I bit my tongue until it nearly bled. Because what no one else knew was that her responsibility was funded by me. There were moments, small ones, where the mask slipped. Late-night texts where she confessed she felt like a fraud. Awkward pauses when I mentioned money, followed by her quick recovery into cheerful superiority. And each time I wired another $200 resentment dug its claws in a little deeper. I told myself I was keeping her secret out of kindness, out of loyalty, but in truth I was becoming a prisoner of it. Her shame chained me in silence, her pride forcing me to carry a burden I never volunteered to hold this long. One evening, after another dinner, where she'd lectured me about planning for the future, I sat in my car in the driveway and whispered aloud to myself, "How long are you going to let this go on?" The question lingered unanswered, but deep down I already knew the answer. By Monday morning, I had slipped back into the rhythm of my real life, the one no one at the dinner table knew existed. Coffee in hand, I sat at my desk, scrolling through the weekend reports. My property manager, Janet, had already sent her usual Sunday night summary: occupancy rates, maintenance updates, tenant applications. The Riverside duplex has 3 applicants, she'd noted. All qualified too, offering above listed rent. If we push, we could raise to $2,900. I smiled faintly. Approve the increase, I typed back. This was the part of my life I never shared. Not with my parents, not with Sarah, not even with Uncle Robert, who prided himself on being the financially savvy one in the family. To them, I was the daughter who drove a modest Honda Civic, worked at a small consulting firm, and rented in a middle-class neighborhood. In reality, I owned 17 rental properties across the city: condos, duplexes, small houses in up-and-coming areas. Together, they generated over $40,000 in monthly income. My consulting firm was nothing more than a front I'd invented to simplify explanations. In truth, I was a strategist, an investor, a quiet builder. 5 years ago, I'd started with a single duplex, scraping together a down payment, living frugally, and reinvesting every spare dollar. 1 property became 3. 3 became 7. And then with leverage and smart timing, 17. I could have lived in a penthouse. I could have driven a new Mercedes every year, but I didn't. Because I learned something Sarah never had: wealth wasn't about appearances. It was about security, leverage, control. And yet, every Sunday, I sat at that dinner table and let them call me the disappointment. Why? Because explaining myself had never seemed worth it. Dad would have found a way to minimize it. Mom would have worried I was taking too many risks. Sarah would have crumbled under the comparison, and her perfect facade would have shattered. So I stayed quiet. I let them believe what they wanted. But lately, as the months of paying Sarah's mortgage stretched into years, silence had started to feel less like peace and more like surrender. That night, after another family gathering where Sarah had held court about financial discipline, I sat at my desk staring at the monthly transfer confirmation, $3,200, clean and simple, vanishing from my account into hers. I thought about her smirk, her offhanded comments, her offers of helpful advice, as if I were a child who needed guidance. A cold laugh escaped me. I had the power to end this illusion. With a single call, I could pull the rug out from under her carefully constructed stage. The thought wasn't malicious, it was inevitable. The longer I propped her up, the more shameless she became. The time had come. I picked up the phone and dialed Janet. My voice was steady. Stop processing the $3,200 transfer to Sarah Matthews. Effective immediately. There was a pause. Janet, ever professional, said carefully, "Are you sure I can adjust the method if there's a technical issue?" "No," I said firmly, surprising even myself with how certain I felt. "Stop all payments. Next month, nothing goes through." Janet hesitated, then nodded through the line. "Understood." When I hung up, my hands trembled not with fear, but with something that felt dangerously close to relief. For 2 years, I'd carried Sarah's secret. For 2 years, I'd funded her illusion. But the double life I'd been living, quiet investor by day, family failure by night, was about to collide with hers. And when it did, the fallout would be catastrophic. I dialed Sarah's number that evening, my thumb hovering for a second longer than usual before pressing call. She answered with her usual breezy tone, as if nothing in the world could shake her. "Hey, Marilyn, what's up?" "Still thinking about Dad's little speech last night." "Don't take it too seriously. He means well." "No," I said, skipping the small talk. "We need to discuss your mortgage." A pause. I heard the faint sound of her wine glass set down on a counter. Her voice shifted just slightly. "What about it? Did the transfer not go through this month?" "They're stopping," I said plainly. "Next month there will be no payment from me." The silence on the other end stretched heavy and suffocating. Then came the sharp inhale, followed by panic, breaking through her composure. "What do you mean stopping, Marilyn? I can't afford that on my salary." "You know I can't. This isn't funny." "I'm not joking. I've carried this for 24 months. That's 2 years, Sarah. I can't keep doing it." Her voice cracked, desperation dripping into every word. "But I'm finally getting ahead. I have a renovation plan for the bathroom. It'll raise the value of the house. I just need a little more time. A few more months, and I'll be stable again." Renovations. I repeated, my jaw tightening. "Sarah, you don't have the money for stability, let alone luxury upgrades. You've been financing an image, not a life." She bristled at my words. "That's unfair. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. I worked so hard to buy this house, Marilyn. I can't just give it up. If the family knew," her voice broke again, dropping into a whisper, "they'd never forgive me. They'd never look at me the same. And that's why I kept quiet," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "But don't confuse my silence with obligation. I won't keep paying your mortgage while you lecture me about responsibility. Not anymore." Her voice rose, tinged with hysteria. "What are you talking about? I never lecture you." "Last night, Sarah, you spent an hour explaining why I should stop wasting money on rent and start building equity, while I've been paying yours." There was a hollow pause. I could almost hear her pride splintering on the other end. "Marilyn, please," she whispered. "If I lose this house, it'll destroy me. Professionally, personally, everything I've worked for will crumble." I closed my eyes. For a moment, guilt flickered sharp and familiar. But then the memory of her smirk, her condescension, her endless boasting replayed in my head. "It's not my job to hold up your image, Sarah. This is where it ends." Her voice cracked completely now, reduced to raw pleading. "Don't do this to me. I'll pay you back, I swear. Just don't pull out now. Not when I'm so close." But I knew better. I had heard these promises for 2 years. When I hung up, my heart pounded with a mixture of guilt and liberation. Sarah wasn't just my sister anymore. She was a storm I had been sheltering, and I had just stepped out from under the umbrella. I knew she wouldn't go quietly. And I was right. 3 days later, she called an emergency family meeting. Mom's voice over the phone was tense. "Sarah's asked us all to come tonight. She says it's urgent." By the time I arrived, the living room felt heavier than usual. Dad sat stiffly in his armchair. Mom perched anxiously on the sofa, Uncle Robert sipping whiskey, like he'd been waiting for drama all day. Sarah stood near the fireplace, her eyes swollen makeup clumsily masking what looked like days of tears. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Mom asked immediately. Sarah drew a shaky breath. "I need to tell you something. Something I've been hiding for a long time." The room quieted, the air so still it seemed to vibrate. "My job pays less than I told you. Much less. I haven't been able to afford my mortgage for 2 years. Dad leaned forward, confusion etched across his face. "Then how the hell have you kept the house?" Sarah's lips trembled. Her gaze darted to me before she forced the words out. "Because Marilyn has been paying it. Every month. All of it." The silence was thunderous. Uncle Robert choked on his drink. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad turned slowly to me, as if he were seeing me for the first time in his life. "Marilyn," Mom whispered, "is that true?" I nodded once, calm and deliberate. $3,200. every month for 2 years. Dad's brow furrowed, his voice sharp. But you don't even... He stopped mid-sentence, realizing what he was about to say. Don't even own property. Don't even make enough to support myself. I finished for him. That's what you were going to say, wasn't it? The room shifted. I could feel it, the old image of me, the failure, the underachiever breaking apart like glass. My so-called consulting job. I continued, my voice steady. It's a cover. I own 17 properties across the city, rental units, duplexes, condos. My business manages over $12 million in real estate assets. I pulled a folded portfolio summary from my bag, one I'd had Janet prepare for just such a moment. I placed it on the coffee table with a soft thud. Uncle Robert snatched it up first, scanning the figures. His voice cracked. 17. Properties $4.2 million in market value. Dad took the paper from him, his hands trembling. This can't be. It can, I said firmly. While Sarah was being praised for her discipline, I was building a business. Quietly, steadily, without anyone's recognition, because frankly, I stopped needing it a long time ago. Sarah let out a sob, covering her face. I never meant for it to go this far. I kept thinking I'd catch up, that I'd be able to pay her back, but... Her words dissolved into tears. Mom turned to her, voice shaking. Why didn't you tell us? Because you all worshipped me as the successful one, Sarah spat through tears. Every dinner, every conversation, it was always about me, and about how Marilyn needed to do better. How was I supposed to admit that I was drowning while she was the one keeping me afloat? The anger in her voice stunned everyone. I sat back, watching the truth tear through the room like a storm. So all those nights you told me to stop wasting money on rent, I said quietly, eyes locked on hers. You were lecturing me while living off my money. Sarah's sobs softened, replaced by something uglier, shame twisted with resentment. Dad leaned back in his chair, his face pale. Marilyn, I owe you an apology. We all do. The words sounded foreign coming from him. Mom's voice was barely above a whisper. Why didn't you ever say anything? Why keep this from us? Because it didn't matter, I replied evenly. You'd already decided who I was. Saying otherwise would have been wasted breath. But I did get tired of bankrolling Sarah's lifestyle while being treated as the disappointment. The room sat in stunned silence. For once, no one had advice, no one had criticism. Just the weight of truth hanging in the air. Sarah wiped her eyes, her voice small. What happens now? You figure it out, I said coldly. You have 30 days to cover your mortgage without me. Sell the house, find a smaller place, get a second job. I don't care, but I'm done. The words settled like a verdict. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't at any Sunday dinner power. The family meeting ended in fragments, Mom fussing over Sarah, Dad pacing with a stiff jaw. Uncle Robert silent for once. I left without dessert, without hugs, without the usual pleasantries. In the days that followed, my phone lit up constantly. Sarah called first, her voice hoarse. Marilyn, I can't cover it, not even close. Please, just for a little longer. I swear I'll figure something out. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just said, 30 days. That's what you have. She hung up crying. Mom called next. Her tone carried the weight of both guilt and denial. Sweetheart, I can't believe you've done all this on your own. Why didn't you tell us? Because you weren't listening, I replied simply. And because Sarah needed her crown more than I needed your approval. There was silence, then a shaky sigh. We were wrong about you. I see that now. Even Dad called his pride, choking his words. I judged you unfairly. I apologize. It was the closest thing to an admission of guilt I'd ever heard from him. But Sarah was unraveling. She stopped bragging at dinners, stopped sending pictures of renovations. Instead, she sent frantic texts, screenshots of her bank balance pleas about the bathroom upgrade being an investment. Desperate reassurances that her promotion was just around the corner. I didn't respond to most of them. At the next Sunday dinner, the shift was palpable. Sarah sat quieter than I'd ever seen her, her plate half full. Dad, instead of praising her, turned to me with cautious curiosity. So, how do you decide which properties to buy? What do you look for? I explained briefly about location and rental yield. His brow furrowed, but there was respect in his eyes I'd never seen directed at me before. Mom leaned forward, fascinated. 17 properties, Marilyn. How do you even manage that? I have a property manager, I said evenly. And discipline. The same discipline Sarah always claimed. Sarah's fork froze in midair. For once, the spotlight wasn't hers. Later, she cornered me in the hallway, her voice low and tight. You've humiliated me." "No," I said, meeting her glare. "You humiliated yourself. I just stopped protecting the lie." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't pleading. They were angry, raw. "They'll never look at me the same way now." "Maybe that's the best thing for you," I replied quietly. "Maybe it's time they see who you really are." Her face crumpled, and for the first time in years, I felt no urge to comfort her. That night alone in my apartment, I reflected on what had changed. The family dynamic wasn't just altered, it was cracked open, raw, impossible to patch back into its old shape. Dad treated me with wary respect. Mom carried guilt in her eyes every time she looked at me. Uncle Robert, of all people, had asked me for advice on rental investments. And Sarah? Sarah was no longer the family's shining star. She was a woman cornered by her own illusions, staring at the reality she had avoided for far too long. I had drawn a boundary, and for the first time in my life, it was holding. A month later, Sarah's house went up for sale. The glossy photos she once flaunted at family dinners became real estate listings online, inviting strangers to walk through the rooms she had once called her dream. She didn't tell the family the details, but I knew. The credit card balances, the loans, the truth she'd kept buried finally forced her hand. When the house sold, she paid off her debts and bought a modest condo on the outskirts of town. Smaller, obviously, she told me the day I helped her carry boxes up the narrow stairwell. Her voice was tired, but there was something different about her, something stripped down. "But I don't wake up every day terrified I can't cover the payments. That's worth more than the marble countertops ever were." For once, she didn't try to dress the moment with pride or performance, and for the first time, I believe she was speaking honestly. Family dinners shifted too. Sarah no longer dominated the table with renovations and promotions. Dad began asking me questions, real ones about investments, market trends, how I'd managed to grow so much in silence. Mom listened closely, sometimes with pride, sometimes with shame. Uncle Robert, of all people, became oddly deferential, as though one revelation had upended the hierarchy he'd always believed in. But the biggest change was between Sarah and me. One evening, weeks after her move, we sat in her new condo, surrounded by unpacked boxes. She poured us both cheap wine into mismatched glasses and stared at the floor. "I feel sick when I think about it," she admitted. "All those years I took your money, all those times I criticized you. I don't know how you can even stand to look at me." I let the silence sit between us for a moment before answering, because I learned something important. Helping family is one thing, enabling them is another. I let it go too far. I let you believe I would always protect the image you built. That was my mistake too. Her eyes brimmed, but she didn't cry. Not this time. She just nodded, slowly absorbing it. The truth was, I wasn't angry anymore. The resentment that had gnawed at me for 2 years had burned out the moment I stopped paying. What remained was clarity. I had done what I thought was kindness, but kindness without boundaries becomes poison. At the next family dinner, Sarah talked about her job search instead of her kitchen tiles. I spoke openly about a new duplex I'd acquired downtown. The conversation was balanced, almost normal. For the first time in years, the table wasn't a stage. It was just a place for family. Months later, Sarah texted me late one evening. "First mortgage payment on the condo. Paid completely by me. It feels amazing. Thank you for everything, and for finally saying no when you had to." I stared at the message, a small smile tugging at my lips. Closure had arrived, not with fireworks, but with something quieter, the sound of a burden finally set down. My family saw me differently now. Sarah was learning to live authentically, without the crown she once clung to. And me, I'd learned that strength wasn't just in building wealth or keeping secrets. Sometimes real strength was in refusing to carry someone else's illusion any longer. No more hidden transfers, no more quiet humiliation. Just me finally seen for who I was. And that was worth celebrating.